Hello, I'm Joel.
And I'm Alex.
Welcome to the Commander's Journey, the place where we discuss our favorite format of Magic, Commander, from the perspective of a new player
and an experienced one.
This journey is for new Magic players interested in Commander. So today we're going to talk about some of the best utility lands in EDH, in Commander, some of our favorites.
Exactly. And, there's a lot of utility lands out there. I'm sure some are absolutely perfect for your deck, so make sure you do a search for them. See some, really specific ones for the deck, but that's not what we're really getting at here. We want to get the most general, can kind of do most things you want in almost any deck. You can get away with it in, and pretty much focusing on those, as well as not having the terribly expensive ones. Like, if I could put a Gaia's Cradle into every green deck, I would, but that is not a reasonable ask. So we don't have stuff like that in there. I think we aren't going terribly expensive with this at all.
Yeah, so I think our ground rules are like, keeping it within a good budget, and then also the definition of utility lands being typically colorless lands, but lands that just do things other than be a land, right? So they might have a special effect or give you a little bit of advantage in your within your game plan, something you want to do.
Exactly. So all those ones that ramp you really hard, like Temple or Ancient Tomb, we're not talking about those here either. Even though EDH considers them, or EDH Rec considers them utility lands, we are not. I see them as a increase land ramp increase.
Exactly. So I think when it comes to lands, it's very important, especially for newer players, which we're a show for, and players like myself. When I first got into playing EDH, Alex, I didn't always understand the idea of how many of these I'm necessarily supposed to have within whatever decks I'm building. So I just want to ask you a few questions to kind of give clarity around that, especially for us who are building our land packages within our deck. So if I'm running, say, a monocolored deck, mono black, say, for instance, how many utility lands would you say might be too much or too little? Like, is there a number? Like, what am I looking at?
So it's not really a number here as much as there is a number, but it's going to be a little more deck specific, right? Like green, I think, can get away with more utility lands than, let's say, white does. Though on average, you can get away with a lot more utility lands in a monocolored deck. You don't have to worry about color fixing. You don't have to worry about getting all your colors. So the more colors you add to a deck, the more, less utility lands you really can safely include.
So I know, like typically, and we recommend having about 37 lands or so in a deck, right? Of course, with about 10 ramp. So if I'm running 2, 3 color, 4 color decks? How do I balance that out? Like with the amount of pips, the amount of colors I got to include in my land packages, and then also utility lands, like. How many is too much? Should I just use a few? Is it more deck specific in that regard, or what am I looking for in that?
When you're looking at 2 color and even 3 color to some degree, your fixing is important. It's the primary focus of your mana base, making sure you can hit those colors when you need it. And then when you kind of can comfortably do that, you can start looking at utility lands. Of course, in a 2 color deck, you get a little more than a 3 color deck, and same thing in 3, a little more than 4 or 5. And honestly, when it comes to 4 or 5, you can kind of get maybe 3, 4 in, depending on how good your mana base is. If you have like a lot of fetch lands and stuff like that, you can get away with a number more of utility lands. You still don't want to get too crazy, but you can get away with some more. But of course, that makes the mana base a lot more expensive. And often it's for a smaller benefit. So in the grand scheme of things, I would look at it like, maybe you can get around half of your deck be utility lands, or, lands that are optional, not just the color-based ones in a monocolored deck. And then, you're looking at maybe a little less than a third in a 2 color, and a 3 color even less than that, and so on and so forth. And you'll find that balance as you play with the deck. If you can't consistently hit a color, you might have too many utility lands in the deck.
So, can you balance that out with some of the more the utility lands or other lands, like an Evolving Wilds, that help you just strictly fix or look for the specific colors you need at that point? And we should clarify for, us newer players, when we talk about mana fixing, you say you're playing a 3 color deck and you have, say you're playing Abzan, which is black, green, and white, right? And you have a bunch of black and green, but you don't have any white. You have so many white pips or lands you can grab out of your deck, but if you have a card like, say, Myriad Landscape, right, which comes in the battlefield tapped and taps for colors, but if you for 2 and tapping it, you can sacrifice it, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards that share land type, and then put them on the battlefield tapped. So you can go find those 2, say, white basic lands you need and put them into play. Put those 2 planes into play. So that's what we mean when we talk about fixing. So I guess the question is, would the amount of those utility lands include fixing cards like Myriad Landscape, or would you say you can have those in addition to?
I would look at fixing. You definitely want to include them. If I'm running anything more than 2 color deck, I'm running both an Evolving Wilds and a Terramorphic Expanse. Just because they're cheap, they get the job done. They'll help you search for that color that you're missing. So, those are more utility. But what is happening is they're really just color fixing, right? They're solving the problem of when you're down a color or missing color. Now, some ones can do that as well, but something like Myriad Landscape as utility land is really saying, you're going to ramp, and then you can also potentially ramp for your missing color. So you get both off of that. When you're looking for the basic land, you can pick what basic land that you desperately need and go for that. But the fact it's 1 land that will essentially turn into 2 lands, that's a ramp spell tacked onto Myriad Landscape.
Okay. So, but like, say you have a 3 color deck and you're considering a third of your lands being utility lands. Would you consider those fixing lands within that utility package, or would you consider those within the pip package or the colors?
I would consider Evolving Wilds and a Terramorphic Expanse as within the package of dual land or dual color lands. I would count Myriad Landscape outside of it. So it's a little bit of that's what I personally do. But honestly, you could probably get away with doing it either way. I don't think that's so critical there. It's more of you kind of look at the grand scheme of things, because Myriad Landscape will help you get to the colors you need. I'm not as worried about that as adding one way or the other.
Okay. So, I mean, just trying to get a really quick, brief overview. So, if you have a deck that you're running, if it's 1 color, it's pretty easy. You can have quite a few utility lands in there. You're really only looking for 1 color. You probably have a lot of basics.
I think you can get away with half, to be honest, if your budget allows it. Yeah.
So you can get away with up to half, because the other half will probably be your basic lands, and you can just. But once you start doing 2, 3 colors, you got to pay a little more attention to fixing your colors, making sure smoothing them over, making sure you can get to the colors you need. But about a third or so, and these are all just recommendations, right? I mean, like, it's give or take. Some strategies are going to want more, some might want less, want to run more basics. You just kind of got to feel it out in the way you like to play.
Exactly. And you'll find, too, as you're playing it, testing, that's how you'll find where that line is in terms of if I have too many or not enough. If you're having consistent trouble fixing your deck, you probably have too many utility lands or colorless lands in it. Lands that really aren't helping get your deck to where they need to go, and they're more there as additional spells that also give you mana. So just keep that in mind. And again, 2 color, I'd say maybe down to around a third, and 3 or 4, we start getting more and more iffy. I would definitely place them with 3, and 4 or 5, you can get away with a few, but really make sure the deck either desperately needs it or really complements the deck to put those in.
All right. So speaking of some of the best utility lands out there, was some of our favorites. So what is your favorite? Let's just get right into it. What's your favorite land? Utility land, Alex?
What's my favorite utility land? So this one was interesting. As we were building the script for this one, I was looking at what utility lands I use the most, what one I pretty much slot into every deck, and there was one clear favorite, and I think I'm much higher on this card than almost everyone else's, so take it with a grain of salt. But my favorite one, and the one I can try to fit in all my decks if I can, is Reliquary Tower. Now, Reliquary Tower taps for a colorless mana, and it just says very plain and simple, you have no maximum hand size.
Yeah, I was getting made fun of at the beginning, where I think I never heard somebody say this card out loud, and the pronunciation, and I said it, Reliquary Tower. Reliquary, but it's Reliquary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is a great card because I think some of the only cards in Magic that I've seen are mostly in blue or maybe green or blue-green that say you have no maximum hand size. But like say you're in a black or a white deck and you're going to have a lot of card draw spell for whatever reason. This is helpful because once you get all those cards in your hand, you do not have to discard them.
Yeah, if you're ever playing anything that you'll end up drawing a lot in one turn, so big mass card draw spells or anything where you're consistently drawing a lot of lands to the point where you would probably hit over the 7 mark, which is what I would like to get to in almost all my games. Having a Reliquary Tower in the deck really helps, and there's spells against that do this as well, but it's really nice. It's just stapled on land, and it's not terribly hard to include it in my decks.
I guess the only decks that probably wouldn't want it are decks that want to discard, right? Pretty much every
exactly.
Every deck
just those discard decks.
That's just about it. That's just about it.
It's all those decks that or even if they draw like just 1 or 2 extra cards. I think those decks are playable, but I think they generally have a harder time to begin with, and that is probably why.
Okay. Well, my favorite.
So I'm about to say, Joel, what's your favorite utility land?
So mine's a twofer. I'm going to give you the one that's not budget and the one that's budget. But my favorite is Maze of Ith. And it's just a land that says tap an untapped target attacking creature. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. And that it does not tap as a land. That's important to note. And I don't consider this within my land package. It's just kind of a really awesome utility card. And its newer brother, I'll say, Labyrinth of Scophos. It's a land that taps for a colorless land. And then for 4 and tap it, you can remove target attacking or blocking creature from combat. They're not exactly the same, but they have similarities. And I don't have a lot of Maze of Iths because it's quite pricey, but I do have Labyrinth of Scophos in a few decks, and I found myself using it a lot. I love that effect. To be able to just, when somebody's attacking me, especially if I'm like maybe lower in, maybe a board wipe just happened, I might be lower in life. I just hold up my mana if I have to because I have no play necessarily. Because I have that Labyrinth on the battlefield and I know somebody's going to try and swing in on me, I can just utilize that. Or with that or the Maze of Ith, you can use it in it also a way to negotiate, make some deals around the table.
Yeah, and there's a couple other ones that have similar effects to Mystifying Maze come to mind, but Labyrinth of Scophos is the new one, and I believe the cheapest option. And I think it's one of the better ones, just because, you get your attacker out of there, and when someone thinks of, what is a utility land, Maze of Ith is what comes to mind every single time. It's just the one that, you don't count a part of the 37 lands in the deck. It's the 38th land. It is a spell that can't be countered that just also happens to be a land. But it's a very unique effect that will get you out of so many sticky situations. Totally in with you, Joel.
Yeah, but the Labyrinth, I think, in some cases that I've found in the way I play, has turned out to be a little bit better than the Maze of Ith because it says remove target attacking or blocking creature. And so I have a deck that likes to goad. I have a Marisi deck. All it wants to do is goad. So with the Labyrinth out, you can utilize that. It's very similar to like a Rogue's Passage. It becomes unblocked. You can just remove the guy that they're trying to use to block you. So even if they got multiple things, then they have to block with multiple things. So you can remove, multiple blocking. But you can remove whatever they're trying to use to block your Marisi. You hit them, boom, now they're goaded.
Yeah, and I bet to say, I think you'd have to put trample on them for that exact scenario. But you definitely could make Marisi always safe whenever you do it using Labyrinth. You're never in a moment of, I don't know if this will be a safe attack, or you can do a more dicey attack because of it. Well, there you go. Such a fantastic addition, just that blocking text on there.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, we can move on to some more lands, not just our favorite, but we'll go into a little in depth about lands that I either pretty much put in all my decks, or if I really need that type of effect, and it's a really common effect, something that's pretty critical as a land that you can have that in as an option.
Yeah, so we can go right into the next one because we're just talking about it. Rogue's Passage. It's a land. If you tap it for a color that's for 4 and tap it, target creature can't be blocked this turn.
Yeah, any deck that's trying to win through creature combat, which I believe was about 80 to 90% of decks, a Rogue's Passage, I try to fit into any single one. It is so nice. It can often just kind of sneak out that win in a dicey board situation, or continue to apply pressure in a situation where normally you wouldn't be able to. I know I get a lot of use out of this thing. How about you, Joel?
Yeah, I do. I think one important thing to note that I ran into is, especially as a newer player to the game, is exactly when to utilize that. So you have to use it before blocks, right? So before blocks are
Yeah.
declared.
Yes.
So how does that go? Like, say I want to say I'm declaring attackers. Then at that point, do I say I'm declaring attackers? I'm going to swing with this guy and this guy, and I'm going to tap my Rogue's Passage to make them unblockable.
Exactly. Right as you declare attackers,
Right
say you're going to use Rogue's Passage right in there as well. If they decide blockers, at that point, it's the declare blocker step. And even if they block it and you add Rogue's Passage to it, they already blocked it. They already declared that blocker. It really doesn't work in that scenario. You have to do it as you're attacking.
Exactly. Yeah, I love this card, and I've utilized it in like in my Marisi deck, and also I think every deck. I almost want to put one in all my decks, just because there's always a time I want to swing in with something.
Exactly. And some deck it's so critical, and you have to deal combat damage to a player to have
Yes.
your commander effect trigger. Sometimes it's just to be able to safely attack someone, apply the pressure. I mean, really a
Yeah.
fantastic utility land. Me and Joel will move right into the next one. Here's another set of utility lands that I've found myself including in every deck I can. If I don't have a spell or an ability that has this effect already in the deck, I will slip one of these two lands in. The first one is Bajuka Bog. It's a land. It enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target player's graveyard, and it, of course, taps for a black. Yeah, and if I'm playing black, at this point, I'm pretty much throwing a Bajuka Bog in the deck.
Yes. And then the other one is, it's very similar to it, Scavenger Grounds, and you can put this in any color deck. It's a land desert, taps for a colorless, and for 2 and tap it, you sacrifice a desert, which you can sacrifice it, or I guess another desert if you have one, and exile all cards from all graveyards. So that'll hit all graveyards. So especially if your play groups plays a lot of graveyard shenanigans, these cards are really great. You gotta have them.
Honestly, yeah. If you don't have another effect that can consistently take out a graveyard or something, they've been printing a few more of them lately that I think are pretty good enough for EDH. But always including a Bajuka Bog or a Scavenger Grounds really just protects you. You always have a situation where if some graveyard deck's getting out of hand, you can be like, okay, I do have an out in this deck. I can, potentially search for it or draw it. You're not dead in the water. You can look for that as an answer.
I need to put more in my decks, even my non-black decks. Get some Scavenger Grounds because every time people were playing those graveyard decks, you just like, if you're not playing blue and can't counter things, it's like, you're looking at the problem right there in their graveyard that they're about to play. It's nice to be able to say, and I'm going to exile that, and I'm going to get rid of that. That's just a fun.
Always. Exactly, and I'm a big proponent of I always want something in the deck that could solve the problem. Now, for me, I don't have tutors generally, so it depends if I draw it or not. But I like knowing that if the situation comes up, I have the answer in the deck. And this is a pretty, because you can add as part of your land package, doesn't ask much of you to do it.
Yeah. Another really good card is Buried Ruin. It's a land that taps for a colorless, and for 2 and tap it, you could sacrifice Buried Ruin and then return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up Buried Ruin specifically for me and Joel, mostly in the idea of monocolored decks. Now, I'm specifically, when I'm generally bringing it up, I'm looking at blue, white, and red. Decks that have trouble ramping, decks that have trouble, or were more likely to play mono artifacts.
Yes.
Throwing a Buried Ruin is a nice solution to those decks, or any big heavy artifact deck, which are more likely, of course, to get in blue. But really, the monocolored decks or the Boros, having a Buried Ruin to get your artifacts back, I really think is key.
Yeah, I've found that in some of those decks that have a hard time ramping on my Esper deck. And I've had somebody do a board wipe of all my artifacts. They got rid of my Soul Ring and maybe 1 or 2 of my Mana Rocks. It's like I'm screwed all over again. It pulls you back several turns. So yeah, this is nice to be able to at least get one of those back out and put it back, put it and play it again. Get your Soul Ring back. You know.
And it's one of those things too. You're not even going to chances are use it every game. Some games, will be pretty low on artifact hate. It's not so much an issue, but it's nice having it out when they're in that situation where they do a get rid of all your artifacts or get rid of your key artifact. And if you're in a combo deck that needs artifacts too, I really would just recommend putting this in. That way you can get it back and you're not out of it.
Exactly.
So on to the next one. Now, this one I think is a key one for newer players, and that's why we talked about it here. If you don't have the money or you're too newer, haven't quite got your land base to where you need it, and this one can help you keep up with everyone else who's gone a little out of their way, making it a really high-end land base. You can kind of even it out a little bit, and that is Thespian Stage. That's a land, of course, and when you could tap it for a colorless. It also says 2 and tap. Thespian Stage becomes a copy of target land, except it has this ability.
That's nice. That's really nice because a lot of times, I think, especially as a newer player, you're not even sure what all these different cards can do. Or, you don't necessarily have the budget to go buy all the nice cards for all your decks. You don't have a Cabal Coffers or a Gaia's Cradle on all your decks. So you can just turn your Thespian Stage into one and utilize that. And it's really good. It's fun. It's fun to use.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those ones too. It's flexible. You can use it to keep up with other players again that are moving maybe a little bit ahead of you based on finances or just happen to what they own. And you can Thespian Stage will keep you in there. And even as a more experienced player, I'll throw in a Thespian Stage in any situation where I'm a little worried about a land, or if there's a situation where I like having the option of potentially getting a Gaia's Cradle or getting a Sarah's Sanctum, something that really would help the deck, and I can't afford it, and I can throw this in instead.
Yeah, very good card. I think the next set of cards are really helpful for any of these decks where you don't really have a lot of good card draw. So if you're playing maybe in white or in red or sometimes black or green, but I think blue, green, and black have a little bit better card draw spells. But these two cards really help you out if you're struggling with card draw. The first one's Arch of Erazka. It's a land with a send, so if you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. You can tap it for a colorless, and then for 5 and tap it, you draw a card. Activate this ability only if you have the City's Blessing. But if you don't have a lot of ways to draw cards, or you're finding yourself struggling, and maybe you've filled all, you've got 10 card draw spells, and you feel like still struggling, add Arch of Erazka into your deck. Or its newer brother, which I know you love this card, and this is a great card.
I do.
Is Bonder's Enclave. It's a land that taps for colorless, and for 3 and tap it, you draw a card. Activate this ability only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. So it's cheaper. It's only 3 to tap it, but you do have to have some significant, some beefy creatures in your deck. But these are just really good cards to have. Yeah, because the card draw is never going away, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's one of those things where there's a lot of card draw lands. Most of them are fairly weak. But, these are two really good examples of if I am playing mono white, mono red, or Boros or whatever, or I just want to have an option, potentially something to do with my extra mana. So even in a green deck where I'm going to potentially have a lot of mana in play, or it's easy to use it for something, this is an out for the mana. It's something that you can use just to draw a card if you need it for Arch of Erazka. And in Bonder's Enclave, honestly, I'm at the point now where if my commander has 4 power or greater, or if I'm playing a green deck or have larger creatures on average, I want a Bonder's Enclave, because it's just something to do with your mana. If you happen to take a turn, maybe you're holding up a counter spell and you didn't use it, you have something to do with it, or potentially if you need to dig for something, you have it in your back pocket as something to do.
And at 3 costs, it's just such a great rate on a land to go ahead and get a card.
Yeah, because I don't generally want to spend 5 mana and really 6 because I have to tap Arch as well to draw a card. It's not a good rate, but sometimes you just need to draw a card. Sometimes you're in colors that really can't. So I wouldn't generally count this as towards your 10 card draw spells for either of these ones, but it's a nice little icing on the cake. It's a nice little potential option for the decks that really need it or can make use of it.
Yeah. And the next two lands, we kind of talked about Myriad Landscape already, but a very similar card to that is Blighted Woodland. It's a land that taps for colors, and for 3 and a green, you tap it, sacrifice Blighted Woodland, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So it does
And
what Myriad does as well.
exactly. What's nice about Blighted Woodlands, it's going to cost 2 more than Myriad to search, but you can search for 2 different colors. I really, for these two, I don't generally count them as ramp cards in the deck, but they are nice extra things you have to get that ramp going, to consistently hit those colors, to really help smooth out the deck and give you 1 mana further. And again, they tap for colorless, so if you're not ready to do it yet, again, on an off turn, you can activate them.
Yeah, I think that's very important to note. Like, you're still going to have your ramp spells in there, and they do help you ramp in a way, but it's more about getting those colors fixed, right? It's more about smoothing out the deck. So if you're suffering and not drawing that color, you have these extra options to go get that, what you need.
Exactly. Moving on, I want to talk about specifically a cycle of cards. I'm not going to go into every one, but this is a more aimed at newer players, but even older players. This is a really fantastic utility land cycle. I would always just take a look and see if the part of this cycle is in your colors and would help out your deck strategy. Not going to go into everything, but this one, so it's a little bit off the topic of what you should do, but I really want to bring it to newer players' attention that this is a cycle that exists and really help out the deck. Our example one from the cycle is the one I probably put in the most, is Kessig Wolfrun. It land again, and it taps for a colorless, but in this scenario you can tap X, red and a green, and tap it. Target creature gets +X/+O and gains trample until end of turn. So this is just an alternate, basically a strong swing or something you can apply pressure with in Gruul, which is often a combat creature-based deck that can take advantage of it. And the whole cycle is fantastic. And they're all a little more specific after this. They're a little more niche. Sometimes it falls along with the color wants to do exactly. Sometimes a little more vague and maybe only specific types of deck want. But take a look at them. See if any of them interest you. They're all from Innistrad block, so yeah.
Innistrad, was there a name for the cycle, or just go look up the Innistrad block?
There probably is. I don't know it off the top of my head, and I looked it up, and I could not easily find it. So if maybe with a deeper dive, I could have ran into it, but it was not obvious. But they're all from Innistrad block. They all are an activation of 2 different colors, and they have an effect that generally those colors want, though. Again, see if your deck wants that as well. I just want newer players to know this cycle exists.
Well, is this one in the cycle? The next one, Alchemist Refuge?
Yes, it is.
Well, let's look at this one. It's a land that taps for 1, colorless, and for a green and a blue, you tap it. You may cast non-land cards this turn as though they had flash.
We'll talk about the other one too. Emergence Zone. It's a land that taps for colorless. When it tap, you sacrifice it, and you may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. So this is an alternate way to give flash to all your non-land permanents or spells, depending on what you need. Often, Vidalcan Orrery or Leyline of Anticipation. They're going Vidalcan Orrery's very expensive, and Leyline's working its way back up, and you might not have blue in it, so you might want to Burn Zone, or if you're playing green and blue, an Alchemist Refuge is great to have.
Or there's that Vivian, I can't remember which one, I think from War of the Spark, where she also gives creatures flash. Yeah, and I think I have these in a deck where I want flash, and it's just, you're not always going to draw your Vidalcan Orrery, right? You're not always necessarily going to draw your Leyline of Anticipation if you need it, but if you have 2 lands that also help you do that, you can still work some of your shenanigans in.
If you have the room for them, slip them in. Emergence Zone, especially because you sacrifice it, I'm a little bit more down on. But if you're in a deck that really likes having that flash or really gets a boost from it, absolutely put these in, or Emergence Zone in if you can't have Alchemist Refuge's colors. Just some way that you have another edge on the table, something else that you can kind of be like, boom, I'm in the game, I'm not out of it,
Yeah. And these last set of cards we're talking about all do a similar thing. First one is Strip Mine. It's a land that taps for 1, but you can tap, sacrifice it, and just destroy target land. And we're not usually for like mass land destruction, but this is nice because you can just get rid of that one annoying pesky land on the other side of the board.
Yeah, I definitely recommend having a destroy land function in every deck, and these are easy ways to do it as they're attached with lands. Another one is Ghost Quarter, which is tap and add a colorless, or tap it, sacrifice it, destroy target land. Its controller may search your library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield and shuffle their library, or even Tectonic Edge, which also taps for a colorless and says one and tap it, sacrifice it, destroy target non-basic land, activate this ability only if an opponent has 4 or more lands. So Tectonic Edge and Ghost Quarter are kind of like the low end on what I would use in a deck. I would not go as low as Field of Ruin or similar effects. Those are probably the lowest end of what I would play in terms of a destruction effect on lands tied to a land. Ideally, Strip Mine and a Wasteland even are better, and there's a whole range in between of lands that have these effects, but I think Strip Mine's like $300 or something, so not a reasonable ask.
Is it that high now?
It's that high. I mean, I mostly threw in Strip Mine in our notes to say this is the prime example, Oregon Wasteland, of this effect.
Well,
you want to have something like that in the deck, but it is really expensive.
It'd be nice if they reprinted that a few times. Help bring that down. But
I know at one point when I looked it up, it was 300. I don't know if it is now.
I definitely have some Ghost Quarters in some of my decks. Those are definitely good because it's. I mean, it's not to be mean. I mean, to deal with one land at a time is a good thing because you can, like I said, if somebody's got an annoying shenanigan they're pulling with the land on the other end of the board, or you just need to get ahead of somebody and just help slow them down a little because they're in the lead. But don't go to the weakest guy on the board and who's losing already and just knock off that extra little land he has. I'm just speaking from experience. It's not a feel-good situation.
Yeah, you definitely. I'm thinking about when you want to use it. Let's say your opponent has a Maze of Ith. We talked about that, and you need. It's really making it hard for everyone to do combat math, making it hard to attack that player.
Exactly.
Let's Tectonic Edge it. Let's Ghost Quarter it. Get it out of here. And Ghost Quarter, it gives them a land, so they're not down a land. They get a basic land back, but of course if they don't play any basics. That's pretty punishing, as well as situations where you don't want it to get it to them. You have Tectonic Edge as an option for just another mana.
Yep. Or if they got a Scavenger Grounds and you're playing a graveyard heavy deck, you don't want that sitting around to knock you out of the game. Yeah. Use it wisely, but I think it's definitely an effect you wanna have in your utility package, for sure.
Yeah, I'm at the point where pretty much any deck I can, I'm throwing in a Reliquary Tower, I'm throwing in a Scavenger Grounds, I'm throwing in a Ghost Quarter or Tectonic Edge, and then depending on what the deck's doing, I'll often throw in a Rogue's Passage if it's combat. I'll throw a Maze of Ith or a Labyrinth if I need that combat advantage. Buried Ruin again if I'm using a lot of artifacts. I'll use Arch or Blighted Woodlands or something when I need extra ramp or extra card draw. And then again, look at the Kessig Wolf Run cycle or Alchemist Refuge if you can play those colors, or if you need the extra flash for that in a burn zone.
Yeah, I just think it's so nice. It depends on what you're playing. So the fun part about building decks is to look at all the fun synergies you can find. And there's even cards we didn't mention here. Maybe if you're playing a colorless deck that doesn't have a lot of options for removal, maybe you play a Blast Zone or you play something else, right? There's so many utility lands. Karn's Bastion that helps you proliferate. I think there's just so many different ways, depending on the uniqueness of your deck and what you're trying to do, which makes it fun, right? You can go to edhrec.com. That helps you kind of, and if you look at different decks that people have built, you're usually going to run into some of those lands. That's what I usually do. I'm like, if I'm trying to build a commander, I look at what lands that other people include, and that's how I've discovered some of these.
I always do that. New player, existing player, take a look at EDH, see if there's a card that slipped through, see if there's a strategy you haven't thought of. It's always nice to see what other people are doing to get an idea of what you want to potentially do or not do.
Yeah, because there's a lot to look through for sure. And that's half the fun, right? Half the fun.
Exactly.
So there you go. There's some utility lands that are just great to add into any of your decks, whether you're playing monocolor, multiple color decks. These are some good things. And it's just a lot of fun to go out and find those utility lands that work hand in hand with the strategy you're going for.
Yeah, and if you're interested in getting any of these lands, please use our affiliate link. We're a small channel; it really helps us out. Anytime you're going to TCG Player, feel free to put our affiliate link in there, and we can, get a little bit back. And we really appreciate whenever you guys do it. Thank you guys so much for those of you who do it, and whoever's interested, please do if you're up for it. And one other last thing I want to point out, is Urborg is colorless and go in any deck, not just black. So feel free to confuse your opponents by throwing in Urborg for no reason.
Urborg of Yawgmoth.
Really psych them out.
Yeah. We got to have the extra money to buy the Urborg, but
it's worth just the why is it in there conversation, which is just fantastic to have. It really confuses your opponents. It really puts them on edge, I'll tell you.
Like, you're playing Is It, and you're going to turn everything into swamps? Really? Yeah. But in addition to,
just add some confusion.
Just because. Well, thank you guys for listening, and we appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.